over the last 15 months, there has been intense debate surrounding the Israel versus Palestine conflict, with much of the discourse discussing whether or not Israel is committing a genocide in the Gaza Strip. Of course, there is now a ceasefire deal, which is coming into effect pretty shortly. I'm not really going to comment on that because, honestly, I wrote this script before the ceasefire deal was agreed to, and I would have to rewrite a lot of it, and I'm not going to do that because writing this script took plenty long enough. I'm a busy college student taking 6 very rigorous classes this semester, and I want to get this video out as soon as possible, so just bear with me, please, okay? The ceasefire deal is also complicated. I don't really know how long it's going to last. I'm a little bit skeptical that it's even going to get past stage 1, but obviously I could not mention the conflict without mentioning that there's a ceasefire deal coming into effect very soon. This video serves to answer the genocide question definitively using real stats and data. I will also talk about other aspects of this war as a whole, such as the UN's involvement and their complicity, the rise of anti-Semitism, the truth about Hamas, and my overall thoughts on the pro-Palestinian movement at large. As you are probably aware by now, unless you're living under a rock, which if you are, thanks for somehow finding this video. One of the main aspects of the Israel versus Hamas war is the accusation that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. And this is a claim that a lot of different groups have made, actually, most notably Amnesty International. Even the Wikipedia page for lists of genocides has this war listed there as a genocide. On a side note, Wikipedia has been completely hijacked by bad faith actors. The definitions of a lot of things revolving around Israel, like Zionism, for example, have been changed to make Israel look worse than it actually is. And I could make an entirely separate video talking about that, but is there actually any validity at all to the genocide claim? In order to make the determination on if Israel is committing a genocide, we must first define what the word genocide actually means, especially since this word has been thrown around like it's nothing since the start of this war in a very irresponsible manner, and the previous impact of the word has been completely diminished as a result. Oxford defines genocide as the deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group. There are other more complex definitions, particularly the one used by the UN, where they value intent. I think that's wrong. Actions speak louder than words, and I'll touch on the UN later, but I think the Oxford definition is perfect, so that's the one I'm going to use. Now, let's go over some famous examples of genocide so that we're on the same page on what it looks like. The most famous example of a genocide is the Holocaust, carried out by Nazi Germany, in which 6 million Jews, 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population, were systematically rounded up and exterminated in concentration camps. This genocide was so devastating that the worldwide Jewish population is still lower today than it was before the Holocaust, even after 80 years. The total death toll of the Holocaust altogether was 17 million people, which included large numbers of Soviet POWs as well as Soviet and Polish civilians, and other groups as well, but the primary group that was targeted were Jews. Unfortunately, we've seen a rise in Holocaust denialism coupled with the rise of anti-Semitism since October 7th, and I find this ironic because the term genocide was specifically created to describe this event. There is no term to describe the specific targeting of a population that the Jews experienced in World War II Europe, and so the term genocide was coined to describe this phenomenon, and it was retroactively applied to past events of the same nature. Holocaust denialism is an extremely low IQ conspiracy theory. The numbers have been verified repeatedly, but here's one example. So this tweet is trying to debunk the Holocaust, and even though the math is completely wrong, it's still got like 65,000 likes or some shit like that. I thought Asians were supposed to be good at math. Of course, he got community noted and then deleted the tweet out of shame, but I don't want to give these lowlives any more attention, so let's move on. One more thing, though, about the Holocaust. The UK-based Islamic Human Rights Commission, which kind of an oxymoron there, has recently called for a boycott of Holocaust Memorial Day in the UK. Pretty fucking disgusting. I'll let you do with that information what you want to, but to any Brits watching this video, I would suggest that you do something about that. Another example of genocide is the Armenian genocide, which occurred before the Holocaust. This genocide is something that Turkey, the successor state to the Ottoman Empire, the state which carried it out, still denies happened. Unfortunately for them, though, the evidence is absolutely overwhelming. Prior to the genocide, the Armenian population of the Ottoman Empire was around 2 million, and afterwards there were only 400,000 left. Most estimates place the death toll at around 1.5 million people, which represents about half of the population of modern-day Armenia. The last genocide I want to touch on is the Rwandan genocide, which was a civil conflict in which the majority Hutu people brutally targeted and murdered the minority Tutsi people in a brutal 3-month span in 1994. This genocide killed at least 500,000 Tutsis, which Human Rights Watch estimates was about 77% of their population. This genocide was also notable for the UN's massive failure to prevent it, or at least to contain it once it started, and if you want to watch a great documentary about that, I would recommend The Ghost of Rwanda. I watched it for a class last semester. It was a little bit hard to watch. It was very brutal, but also very informative as well. So what do all these genocides have in common? A very large percentage of the pre-genocide population being wiped out. That's not necessarily a prerequisite for genocide. All that matters is the targeting aspect, but I do think it's important to keep this in mind. So, with all that being considered, let's now answer the question, is Israel committing a genocide in Gaza? Well, the short answer is no, but let's actually prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, which is run by Hamas, maybe you knew that, maybe you didn't, but if you didn't know, you do now. Around 46,000 Palestinians have died during the course of this war, with an additional 11,000 that are said to be missing. We also have to consider that Hamas has every incentive in the world to inflate these numbers to make Israel look bad. And they've done this before. So back in October of 2023, at the very start of the war, there was a hospital in Gaza that was bombed. And according to the Gaza Health Ministry, 471 people were killed and 342 injured. And they came out with that number like right after it happened. And of course, Israel was accused of bombing the hospital. You had people like Rashida Tlaib running with it because obviously she was going to run with it. She loves Hamas. Turns out this was a total lie. Israel was not the one to bomb the hospital. It was actually a Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket that fell short. Even Human Rights Watch, which is certainly not on Israel's side, admitted that the Gaza Health Ministry's numbers could not be corroborated. Essentially, the Gaza Health Ministry made up a number and people ran with it. And I'm sure there are people out there that still believe that Israel bombed this hospital because, let's be honest, corrections are seen much less frequently than the original headline. And this is not the only time the Gaza Health Ministry has been caught making up numbers. There are more instances of this. So at the very least, the numbers that are presented by them should be taken with a grain of salt. One crucial thing to know is that the Gaza Health Ministry does not distinguish between civilians and terrorists in their numbers, so the 46,000 count also includes Hamas terrorists that have been killed. The Gaza Health Ministry does not tell you how these people have died, so we can assume that at least some of these 46,000 have died of natural causes, whether that be as a result of the war or not. This number also includes people that Hamas themselves have killed, whether directly by shooting them for speaking out against them, which unfortunately does happen. I'll play a video of that happening here. And it also does not include indirect Hamas deaths. For example, a Hamas rocket that falls short and lands in Gazan territory, which is also not that uncommon.
تتجه نحو البحر الآن ربما أحمد باتجاه حقل الغاز
But for the sake of the argument, for shits and giggles, let's take Hamas at their word and say that the 46,000 number is 100% spot on, dead accurate. And let's even add in the 11,000 that are missing and say that every single one of those people are dead. I think it's highly unlikely, if not nearly impossible, that this number is accurate, but let's just humor Hamas and say that it is. Since the Gaza Health Ministry does not separate the civilians from terrorists from their numbers, that's something that we need to do. So let's see how many terrorists have been killed. Unfortunately, I actually could not find a recent number for this. I didn't look at Hebrew sources because I don't speak Hebrew, although I do want to learn. I'm going to be starting pretty soon, but maybe I missed something. If anybody knows about a recent number straight from the IDF, let me know. I'd be very curious to know what it is. But from what I could find, most sources place the number of Hamas terrorists killed at around 17,000. However, all of those numbers seem to be from at least October 2024 and before then. Without a more concrete number to go off on, let's just make things easy on ourselves and use the 17,000 number. I do also have to mention that the numbers presented by Israel should also be taken with a grain of salt, although a much, much smaller one. I'm trying to stay as unbiased as I can in this section, and then I'll get into personal opinions later on, and that's where I'm going to get fiery. But the reality is that numbers in war are foggy a lot of the time. But I think Israel's numbers are way more likely to be accurate than the Gaza Health Ministry's numbers, since Israeli intelligence is top-notch, it's some of the best in the world, and if the IDF was caught inflating numbers to make themselves look better, there could be some very real consequences for that. Israel is a democratic country. What consequences would Hamas have for inflating the numbers? They're a terrorist group. Anyways, with these estimates, we have 57,000 total deaths, which is being exceptionally generous to Hamas, and 17,000 terrorist deaths, which probably is an underestimate. That leaves us with about 40,000 civilian deaths. Why am I talking so much about these numbers? Well, Israel is conducting an extremely challenging war. I would argue one of the hardest wars that any country has ever had to fight. I'm not a military expert, so don't take my word for it, but the conditions on the ground are incredibly challenging, and I'll talk about why in the Truth About Hamas section. By all accounts, this war would be classified as an urban war. There are pretty much no rural areas in Gaza. It's a small piece of land, very small. It's actually smaller than Andorra, a tiny microstate sandwiched in between Spain and France. And for an American perspective, Gaza is almost 12 times smaller than Rhode Island, the smallest state in the US. And you know what? This has always bugged me, so I'm just going to get it off my chest now. Why is Rhode Island called Rhode Island? It's not an island. It makes zero sense. Who was the dumbass who came up with that name? Anyways, that's not relevant. Let's get back on track. But why is the fact that this is an urban war important? Because, according to the UN, around 90% of those killed in urban warfare are civilians. So we have a civilian to combatant death ratio on average of 9-to-1 in urban warfare environments. Now, when we look at the numbers in this war, we can straight away see that they're way lower than that. If we do the simple math of 40,000 civilian deaths and 17,000 Hamas deaths, that leads us to a civilian to combatant death ratio of 2.35 to 1, which is extremely low for a war of this type. And I also think it's worth bringing up that most estimates of death ratios for this war have this number lower, some as low as 1.5 to 1, and even 1 to 1. If Israel was really committing genocide, wouldn't this number be way higher? But regardless of what the exact ratio is, it's way lower than the 9-to-1 average ratio, even if the death count is higher than 57,000, which I guess is not totally impossible, the ratio is still lower. There's a study from The Lancet that came out earlier this month that claims that the death toll is being underreported by 41%. I'm not really going to comment on that because I personally don't think it's accurate. Some of the people who conducted that study are very anti-Israel, so bias absolutely could have come into play there. Some groups also have the death toll a lot higher than what the Gaza Health Ministry does. I've seen some estimates even as high as 186,000, but let's be honest, there's zero concrete evidence to actually back that number up. Regardless of the numbers, though, genocide occurs when a group is specifically targeted. That is what the definition of genocide is. So, is Israel intentionally targeting civilians? To keep it brief, because I don't want this video to be like 2 hours long, no, they're not. There is no evidence at all that Israel is intentionally targeting civilians. In fact, if they wanted to maximize civilian deaths, it would not be very hard for them to do that. If there was actually a genocide, if Israel wanted to kill as many Gazans as possible, there would probably be at least 500,000 dead at this point. The IDF is very powerful, and Gaza is tiny. They could just carpet bomb the entire place if they wanted to, and boom, that's it. Threat eliminated. Of course, they won't do that because they actually care about protecting civilian life. If they didn't, first of all, why even bother putting your own soldiers at risk? Around 900 IDF soldiers have been killed since October 7th. Israel has also dropped leaflets throughout the war in Arabic in Gaza warning civilians to evacuate the area. They warned civilians ahead of airstrikes, and they've done that for years. Again, why would they do that if they wanted to kill as many civilians as possible? It does not add up. That is not the action of a genocidal army. They've also done the same thing in Lebanon, and I'll get to Lebanon a little bit later. Every action that Israel has taken throughout the course of this war has been to limit civilian casualties, and they've done that pretty successfully. They're not perfect. No army in the world is. They've made mistakes for sure. I'm not denying that. But considering the conditions on the ground, it's honestly remarkable that more civilians have not died. Of course, it's tragic whenever civilians die. I really wish this wasn't happening. This is a terrible, awful, disgusting war that needs to end as soon as possible, with every single hostage freed and Hamas out of power in Gaza, so that Gazans can actually build a meaningful future for themselves. Civilian casualties are an unfortunate byproduct of war, and especially in this war that Hamas started. Hamas also does not care at all about their civilians. They actually want them to die, but I'll talk about that at length later on. The summary of this entire section is that the genocide argument falls flat on its face when you examine the real data and see how Israel is conducting this war. They are obviously not targeting civilians, and anyone who says they are lying to your face. If this war is a genocide, then so is every war ever. For example, Russia's war in Ukraine. Personally, I do not believe Russia's war in Ukraine is a genocide. Russia is 100% committing war crimes in Ukraine. The main one that comes to mind is the Bucha massacre near the start of the war, which really rattled me. But I don't think the war in Ukraine constitutes genocide. I don't want you to get the sense that I'm pro-Russia because of this, because that could not be further from the truth. I'm fully on Ukraine's side. But I think it's interesting how Russia is conducting the war in Ukraine with much less care for Ukrainian civilian life, and again, killing civilians on purpose, like you saw in Bucha, and almost nobody says they're committing genocide. There's clearly a double standard placed on Israel. Let's now move on to the United Nations and their complicity in this war. First of all, the UN is complete and utter trash. I took a class last semester that I really liked called International Organizations, and we spent a good chunk of the second half of the semester talking about the UN. I came into that class very anti-UN, and now a little bit less so. I don't think the UN is completely useless anymore. Some of the UN agencies like UNICEF, for example, do good work, even though they never bothered to actually go visit the child hostages. And it would be difficult to replace them if the UN was actually shut down completely. However, that does not make the UN a redeemable organization. It's still awful. Maybe I'll make a full-length video on why the UN sucks later. Maybe, again, if you're interested in that, let me know. But I have a lot of criticisms of the UN, especially when it comes to this war. I'll start with the fact that they continue to employ Francesca Albanese, or is it Albanese? I don't know. I should know because she's Italian and I'm also part Italian. But she is a rabid anti-Semite. And when I say rabid, I really do mean rabid. I'm going to put some tweets on screen from her along with a couple of headlines. Just take a minute to read these. Pause the video if you need to. Do whatever you need to do. This woman is fucking psychotic.
Go Bombs!
Even to the point where Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, who is certainly not an angel in his own right, called her a horrible person. Extremely rare W on his part, but can he not do something about her? Antonio, you are in charge. Fire her. Can he fire her? I don't know. Maybe he can't. But if you can, why is she still employed by the UN? I'll also show a few videos that really display Francesca's depravity quite well.
The colonial amnesia of the West has condoned Israel's colonial settler project from the violent history of the very birth of the State of Israel. People around the world are taking to the streets, gathering, protesting, and demanding equal rights of all, from the river to the sea.
Ms. Albanese, your report accuses Israel of genocide. Now, at page 2, you say your report does not examine the Hamas crimes of October 7th because they are, quote, beyond the geographic scope of my mandate. Now, you went on a recent official trip to Australia, all expenses paid by the UN. Could you explain how Australia is within the geography of your mandate, but not the mass murder, rape, torture committed by Hamas terrorists on October 7th, invading Israel from Gaza, kidnapping hundreds of hostages, including babies and Holocaust survivors? If you ignore the Hamas massacre that started the war, the 14,000 rockets fired against Israeli towns, 130 hostages now being tortured in Gaza, how can you possibly understand the war? Now, although you say it's not in your mandate, you have commented. On February 10th, you mocked the statement of President Macron that October 7th constituted the greatest anti-Semitic massacre of our century. You said the victims were, quote, not killed because of their Judaism, but rather in reaction to Israel's oppression. In response, for the first time in history, both France and Germany condemned a UN rapporteur for anti-Semitism.
What's the need to talk about mass rapes? There is no evidence of rape, which doesn't mean that rape didn't occur, but there is no evidence.
About how ending, in your words, the occupation and genocide will benefit both Israelis and Palestinians. One, do you view all Israelis as settlers and thus legitimate targets of resistance? And two,
is ingenious to use, like, to understand or try to force anti-Semitism on what happened on October 7th. And I said, maybe some Palestinians among those who had attacked Israel on October 7th were also anti-Semite. But Israel was not attacked because of that. The hatred that killed the Israelis on that day was not prompted by anti-Semitism, was prompted by years and decades of dispossession, humiliation, subjugation.
Wow, I mean, some of those videos are just wild, you know, saying there's no evidence of rape, even though the terrorists bragged about raping people. You know, when she was asked, do you view all Israelis as settlers and legitimate targets, she shrugged. I mean, there are so many other clips that I could have played. She had a very infamous appearance on Piers Morgan that I thought about including, but decided against it because it was kind of long. But this is clearly not someone who should be employed by the UN. She is deranged. As you saw in that first video, Germany and France have asked for her to be removed from her position, and President Biden's UN ambassador, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, called her unfit for her role, which is true, and, quote, the United Nations should not tolerate anti-Semitism from a UN-affiliated official hired to promote human rights, end quote. And Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield is 100% correct about that. And that's really the tip of the iceberg about the UN. You think it's just about her? No, there's way more to talk about. I'm just getting started. There has always been a bias against Israel in the UN General Assembly. And with the way that the UN is set up, it's always going to be that way. You have one Jewish state compared to the 50 or so Muslim majority countries, most of which would love nothing more than for Israel to be wiped off the map. But I don't think people realize just how biased against Israel the UN really is. Just in 2024 alone, there were 17 UN General Assembly resolutions passed against Israel. On its face, that might not sound like a lot, but no other country had more than one. Not even Russia, despite the fact they are conducting a brutal war in Ukraine. What about Turkey for massacring Kurds? Crickets from the UN. What about the Taliban regime in Afghanistan for treating women and girls like second-class citizens, for not allowing young girls to go to school, for not allowing their voices to be heard in public, for not even allowing them to be seen in windows? Silence. What about Venezuela for their sham election and for kidnapping the opposition leader to Nicolas Maduro? I understand the kidnapping was this year, but still, no UN General Assembly resolutions for either of those things. What about demanding that Hezbollah actually follow Resolution 1701? Why bother? And get this, there have been 0 resolutions in the General Assembly condemning Hamas. 0. Not a single one. And if you think this is only a problem this past year, oh boy, do I have news for you. Since 2015, the UN General Assembly has passed a whopping 156 condemnatory resolutions against Israel. The next closest country is Russia with 24. Syria only has 11, Iran 8, and North Korea has 9. You heard that right. North fucking Korea has 9. And the thing is, it gets better. The Human Rights Council, which actually doesn't care about human rights, because if they did, they would not allow countries that regularly abuse human rights to sit on the Human Rights Council, has passed 108 condemnatory resolutions against Israel since 2006. The next closest is Syria with 45. North Korea has 17. Iran has 15. And known human rights abusers like Qatar, China, Saudi Arabia, and Cuba all have 0. That should tell you everything you need to know. But the best part, to top it off, here's this fun graph that was broadcast on CNN in 2017. It shows that from 2012 to 2015, 86% of all UN resolutions were against Israel, and 14% for the other 192 member states combined. What more needs to be said? Seriously, what more needs to be said? Even if you don't like Israel, you have to admit that 86% of resolutions being directed at one country is ludicrous. It's like the UN is playing a game of, let's just see how biased against one country we can be, because it's just so fun. It's not just the actual UN itself that's biased against Israel. That's not the main problem. It's the fact that the UN continually condemns Israel for defending itself. For example, a couple weeks ago, the Houthis, which is a radical Iranian-backed Islamist terrorist group operating out of northwestern Yemen, fired ballistic missiles into Israel at like 3 in the morning, some ridiculous hour, mainly targeting Tel Aviv. And make no bones about it, these missiles are being fired into Israel with the intention of killing civilians. And if Iron Dome was not a thing, it absolutely would kill civilians. I don't think people realize that if Iron Dome didn't exist, Israel would be worse off than Gaza right now. There'd be maybe millions of people dead in Israel. This is also not a once-off thing. The Houthis have been firing missiles into Israel for months now. It happened again early Tuesday morning. The Houthis launching missiles into Israel at, guess what, 3 a.m. No country could allow this to continue. People can't keep living like this. It's not sustainable. But guess what? The UN never says anything about this because of course they don't. But then Israel retaliates against the Houthis because of course they're going to retaliate. You cannot allow terrorists to launch missiles at major population centers in the middle of the night and do jack squat about it. So Israel retaliates, and then and only then does Antonio Guterres make a statement about it. He says that he regrets this escalation between Yemen and Israel. Oh, it's so terrible. That's funny, Antonio. Maybe you should have said something after the Houthis launched ballistic missiles at Tel Aviv at 3 in the goddamn morning. Maybe you should have condemned the Houthis for actually being the ones to escalate, but considering he's only mentioned the Houthis 3 times on his Twitter account, it's clearly not a priority. He also got flamed pretty badly for this tweet, so much so that he deleted it. I'm serious, he actually deleted this tweet. Try to go find it, you're not going to. He's also only mentioned Hezbollah twice on his account, while he's mentioned Israel 49 times. You see what I mean about the UN? It's comical at this point. What else can you really say? Let's now actually touch on the UN's complicity in this war. And you cannot talk about this topic without discussing the UNRWA, which I'm going to call UNRWA because it's just easier that way. So UNRWA stands for the UN Refugee Works and Relief Agency for Palestine Refugees. It's a UN agency that is supposed to provide aid to Palestinian so-called refugees. That sounds fine on its own. I do have to mention that the Palestinians are the only group of people in literally the entire world that has a UN agency all to themselves, which I think is a bit strange, but you know what? Whatever. It's not that important. However, there's been a ton of controversy surrounding UNRWA since October 7th, and I'll get into that, and I'll also show you why this organization is not part of the solution, it's part of the problem. So, to start, it is proven beyond a reasonable doubt that UNRWA employees took part in the October 7th massacre. Here is an UNRWA employee taking part right here. There you go. Take a look. He's not the only one, by the way. There are plenty more. UNRWA's ties to Hamas are undeniable at this point, so much so that UNRWA basically is Hamas. A great report from UN Watch that came out on the 7th lays this out definitively. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's long, and this video is already going to be long enough, so I'll leave it linked in the description. Please go read it if you can. It's incredibly damning, but here's a couple of pictures that really show what I'm talking about, so yeah, I'll let this kind of play out. We also have to talk about UNRWA schools and what they're teaching to young Palestinian children in both Judea and Samaria, which is more commonly referred to as the West Bank, and Gaza, and I'll let them speak for themselves.
لأنه نعمل حرب إنه نفرجن اليهود إنه إحنا مش إنه إحنا مش شاطرين إحنا قوايا كمان. في ناس بحبوا فلسطين بدهم يحاربوا وبضحوا بدمهم عشان فلسطين. أنا بدي أهزمهم بالحرب. بدي أهزمهم.
بيعلمونا إنه الأقصى إلنا وإلنا يعني الحق يعني إلنا فلسطين والأراضي كلها إلنا لأنهم بسبب كذبهم وانتهاكاتهم إنهم يقولون إنه الهيكل تحت المسجد الأقصى ولا مرة إنه يكون الهيكل تحت المسجد الأقصى.
أنا بقرأ اليهود.
بعلمونا إن الصهيونية هم أعدائنا وهم أهم شيء لازم يسوي فيهم عملية.
يعني انهم بيعلمونا بالمدرسه انهم ارهابيين
بيحكوا لنا عن اليهود. إنهم هدول مش منيح وهدول بقتلوا قاعدين بشبابنا. بيحكوا لنا هدول غدارين، وبيحكوا لنا إنه هدول بغدرونا، هدول مش منيح. إذا بطعن بدعس عليهم. عمل عمليات.
كيف يعني؟
الدعس، عمليات الدعس، عمليات الطعن والاشتباك المسلح في المخيمات.
إيش أكيد هدول العمليات ترفع الراس ولفلسطين. العمليات هاي تاعت الدعس والسكاكين هاي إشي بيرفع الراس لفلسطين.
إذا بدك بطلع بستشهد عادي. أنا إن شاء الله أساعد الشباب وإن شاء الله أصير مقاوم بالمستقبل مع الدولة الإسلامية.
So I don't think I need to tell you that this is absolutely reprehensible. Whenever I see videos like these, it makes my blood boil. Teaching children to hate like this is flat out evil. Children are not naturally like this. Most kids do not see color, religion, where you're from, all this other shit that us adults care about for some reason. They only see fellow human beings. No one comes into the world with hate like this in their heart. This is what indoctrination looks like. And if you ever wonder why this conflict never ends, this is part of the reason why. The cycle of violence will continue forever as long as the next generation of Palestinians are taught to hate Jews, to kill Jews, and to grow up to be shaheeds. Education in the Palestinian areas of the West Bank and in Gaza has to change. There is no prospect of peace if this continues. You cannot live in peace with people who want to kill you. It's peace-loving Palestinians, people who don't hate Jews, people who believe in coexistence with Israel. That is what will lead to peace, not indoctrinating kids into having a bloodlust for Jews. That is not going to accomplish anything except more violence on both sides, and we certainly do not want that. It's gone on long enough already. The final thing I want to talk about regarding the UN's complicity is UNIFIL, which stands for the UN Interim Force in Lebanon. Now, you may be wondering why I'm even bothering to talk about Lebanon, since that doesn't have anything to do with Israel's war in Gaza, but that's actually not the case. Hezbollah, which is an Iranian-backed Shia Islamist terrorist group, is closely aligned with Hamas, and they started firing rockets into Israel on October 8th. So anyways, UNIFIL is supposed to be a peacekeeping force that has technically been active since 1978, so much for interim, but really the main reason they're in Lebanon at the moment is to enforce UN Resolution 1701, which is supposed to prevent Hezbollah from passing south of the Litani River, to prevent them from building up weapons and their soldiers near the Israeli border, which UNIFIL have completely and utterly failed at doing. The only condition of the resolution that was actually fulfilled was Israel withdrawing from Lebanon after the 2006 invasion. Also, you probably did not know this if you are not a close follower of the conflict, but Hezbollah was gearing up to launch an October 7th style attack in the north of Israel. So my question to the anti-Israel crowd is, what is Israel supposed to do about this? Nothing? The same thing goes for Hamas, promising to commit more October 7th style massacres. I'll talk about them in a little bit. Even if you are against the way the state of Israel was created, even if you don't think Israel has a right to exist, it's all irrelevant, because the reality is that Israel does exist. And just like every other country in the world, Israel has an obligation and a duty to protect its people from harm. What about North Korea? North Korea sucks, but it still has an obligation to protect their citizens. Whether or not they actually do that is besides the point, but every country in the world, regardless of if you love them or hate them, they suck or they're amazing, has a duty to protect its people. So UNIFIL was not preventing Hezbollah from not just passing south of the Litani, but from building up weapon stockpiles in Lebanese border towns. And they, just like Hamas, put rockets in civilian houses, in schools, in hospitals, the whole 9 yards. And because of the constant rocket fire from Hezbollah into northern Israel and Israeli border towns, many Israelis had to evacuate their homes in the north. And at one point, there were 200,000 Israelis internally displaced, which is about 2% of the entire population. From an American perspective, this would be on the same level as if the entire state of Alabama or my adopted home state of South Carolina had to be evacuated. That's over 5 million people. And yet the UN doesn't care about this. They say nothing. They don't give a crap about Israeli civilians. And they've made that very clear. People have been displaced from their homes for over a year. They've been living in hotels. Kids can't go to school. It's unacceptable and unsustainable. So of course Israel had to do something about Hezbollah. They had no choice. So Israel proceeds to launch an invasion into Lebanon to take care of Hezbollah, and UNIFIL has the audacity to complain about it. I'm sorry, but what is it that you actually do here? Has Israel been perfect at all times while conducting their wars? No, of course not. Every army in the world makes mistakes, and the IDF is certainly not immune from doing that. But I would love for anybody to tell me what UNIFIL has actually been doing for the last 18 and a half years since Resolution 1701 was passed, because here's this picture showing a Hezbollah tunnel no more than like 50, 100, 150 meters away from a UNIFIL station. I don't know, I'm bad with the metric system, but it's very close. It's within viewing distance. Here's another one, a literal Hezbollah training center within 200 meters of a UNIFIL base. What is UNIFIL there for if they can't take action? It's literally within viewing distance of the UNIFIL base. And then I've been playing this video showing Hezbollah weapons, again, within viewing distance of a UNIFIL base. What the hell are you doing, UNIFIL? And this is the best part. So in October, after the IDF uncovered these Hezbollah tunnels, UNIFIL said they knew about the tunnels but aren't allowed to conduct searches on private territory. I'm sorry, what is private territory supposed to mean? Hezbollah does not own the land. Stop being pussycats and actually do the job that you are there to do. These tunnels are in clear violation of Resolution 1701, which is pretty much the only reason UNIFIL is there in the first place, to enforce the resolution. So if you can't do that, why are you there? If anything, you're getting in the way and indirectly helping Hezbollah. So leave. You are not helping. You're making things worse. So get out. But of course, how could I talk about Lebanon without bringing up the absolutely iconic and infamous pager operation, which for some reason was controversial, even though it was the single most successful anti-terrorism operation ever conducted. So because Hezbollah is a terrorist organization, if they were to use cell phones to communicate with each other, their conversations could be traced and the IDF would be able to find them. So what they did was buy pagers and other low-tech communication methods so that Israel could not trace their conversations and they wouldn't be able to find them. And the best part about this was they were bragging about this. They were like, hey, look at us, we're so smart. We just bought new pagers so that Israel can't find us. Ha ha ha, checkmate Israel. Well, guess what? The pagers that they bought were actually rigged with tiny explosives that were put there by the IDF. Well done, Israel. It's so brilliant. So in September, Israel approves the operation. They explode all the pagers and mass chaos ensues, with Hezbollah fighters going blind, losing fingers, and best of all, getting their family jewels blown off. I'm sorry, it's just too funny. The thought of Hezbollah members' pee-pees getting blown off is just too good. But guys, look and see how progressive Israel is, giving Hezbollah members free sex changes. Where's the praise from the LGBTQ advocacy groups? Queers for Palestine, you seeing this? Did you see this? Because look at how progressive Israel is, guys. Come on. Keep in mind though that only members of Hezbollah had these pagers. So when people accused Israel of terrorism, which of course happened because people are fucking idiots, it doesn't hold any water because they targeted only Hezbollah. Again, no one else had these pagers. And unfortunately, some other people got too, including some children, which really does hurt my heart. But you know what? Maybe their father shouldn't have joined Hezbollah. That's a really easy way to keep your kids safe. Don't join a terrorist organization. Very, very simple. But this operation did significant damage to Hezbollah. I'll put the numbers on screen here. And it was absolutely glorious and hilarious. I loved every second of it. I remember that day very fondly. It was so funny. It was so good. But you also had morons accusing Israel of genocide in Lebanon, which is hilarious. Tell me you don't know what genocide is without telling me. And like I mentioned earlier, Israel drops leaflets in civilian areas warning people to leave. They also call civilians telling them to leave. Once again, that is not the act of a genocidal army. Let's now transition into talking about Hamas, which is the main terrorist group that Israel is fighting, and the one that carried out the October 7th massacre, killing 1,200 people and taking over 250 hostages, including children, the youngest of which, Kfir Bibas, was 9 months old at the time. They kidnapped a literal baby. To summarize, Hamas, which is actually an acronym, I'm not even going to attempt to say this in Arabic because I will butcher it very badly, but in English it's the Islamic Resistance Movement, and this is an Iranian-backed Sunni Islamist terrorist group that's been active since 1988, and Hamas is one of the most brutal and repressive terrorist groups anywhere in the world. Now, I'm just now realizing that I brought up the term Islamist a few times without actually defining it, so before I dive into the truth about Hamas, I'll quickly do that. Islamism is essentially political Islam. So you have regular Muslims who may pray 5 times a day, they fast on Ramadan, all that stuff. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Anyone should be able to practice their religion peacefully as long as they aren't harming anyone else. But Islamism is extremely dangerous. Every single ex-Muslim out there that I've watched, Yasmin Mohammed, apostate prophet, Nuria Khan, even non-Muslims like Elika Laban, they warn about the danger of Islamism. It is an ideology that seeks to control all aspects of someone's life: social, political, economic, personal, you name it. Islamists believe that Islamic law should supersede all state, provincial, national, federal laws, all that stuff. And those people are willing to do anything they can to spread it. They essentially want the entire world to be under the rule of Islam, an Islamic caliphate, which means that Western society will not exist anymore. Say goodbye to liberal democracy, rights for women, rights for gay people, all of it, gone. Sharia would be the law of the land. And as you see in many Islamic countries, that's already happening, the most extreme of which is in Afghanistan, run by the Taliban, which is another Islamist terrorist group. Like I mentioned earlier, women have essentially no rights there. Birds actually have more rights than women in Afghanistan, because at least birds can sing and make noise in public, and they're not going to be harmed for it, and women are unable to do that. And LGBT rights, non-existent in Afghanistan. They'll either send you to jail or straight up execute you for being gay there. What Afghanistan looks like under the Taliban is the goal for all the Islamist groups around the world. So back to Hamas. Again, this is an Islamist terrorist organization with the goal of destroying Israel and murdering Jews. Don't believe me? I'm going to read some of the things that they say in their charter. It's been translated, but the translations are all consistent across multiple sources. So here we go. Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. Not them admitting that they're the real colonizers. You kind of messed up there, guys. The land of Palestine is an Islamic waqf, holy possession, consecrated for future Muslim generations until Judgment Day. No one can renounce it or any part, or abandon it or any part of it. The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews, when the Jew will hide behind stones and trees. The stones and trees will say, "O Muslims, O Abdullah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him." Peace initiatives and so-called peaceful solutions and international conferences are in contradiction to the principles of the Islamic resistance movement. Those conferences are no more than a means to appoint the infidels as arbitrators in the lands of Islam. There is no solution for the Palestinian problem except by jihad, terrorism. Initiatives, proposals, and international conferences are but a waste of time and exercise in futility. The enemies have been scheming for a long time and have accumulated huge and influential material wealth. With their money, they took control of the world media. With their money, they stirred revolutions in various parts of the globe. They stood behind the French Revolution, the Communist Revolution, and most of the revolutions we hear about. With their money, they formed secret organizations, such as the Freemasons, Rotary Clubs, and the Lions, which are spreading around the world in order to destroy societies and carry out Zionist interests. They stood behind World War I and formed the League of Nations through which they could rule the world. They were behind World War II, through which they made huge financial gains, even though 6 million of them died. There is no war going on anywhere without them having their finger on it. Zionism scheming has no end, and after Palestine, they will covet expansion from the Nile to the Euphrates River. When they have finished digesting the area on which they have laid their hand, they will look forward to more expansion. Their scheme has been laid out in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Hamas regards itself as the spearhead and the vanguard of the circle of struggle against world Zionism. Islamic groups all over the Arab world should also do the same, since they are best equipped for their future role in the fight against the war-mongering Jews. There you go. What more needs to be said? That's straight from Hamas's charter. So, in summary, they don't believe that the day of judgment will occur until all the Jews are dead, and the only way to solve the Palestinian problem is not through peace and negotiations. Nope, it's through endless terrorism. And of course, the charter is riddled with anti-Semitism, talking about how Jews run the world, they control the media, they cause all the world's problems, predictable stuff. It's not surprising that that stuff is in there. The funniest part about this, though, is they try to claim that Christians, Muslims, and Jews can coexist together peacefully under the wing of Islam. I mean, just look at history. That's obviously not true. But literally earlier on in the charter, they said that the day of judgment's not going to happen until the Jews are killed. So which is it? Long story short, if you support this group, you support every single Jew on the planet being murdered. Plain and simple. Not just Israeli Jews either. That's why they talk about world Zionism. So with this thought process in mind, you can totally understand why, according to them, kidnapping Jewish children is A-okay. They do not see Jews as human beings. Here's a video of a Hamas official calling Jews filthy and disgusting animals.
لنرى شذاذ الآفاق إخوان القردة والخنازير، وهم يعيثون فيه فسادا وظلما وبغيا. فقد ورد في الأثر أنهم قتلوا 70 نبيا من أنبياء بني إسرائيل في ساعة من نهار ولم تقفل أسواقهم، فخسف بهم إلى حيوانات مستقذرة مستقبحة مثل القردة والخنازير، كل ذلك بما جلبوه من ظلمهم وبغيهم.
I could show you more videos like that to get my point across, but I don't want to subject you to any more of this barbarism, so I think that's enough. That video also talks about how they don't care how many people die. The price is never too high to defeat the enemy. Here's the last video for a while. It's another Hamas official promising to repeat October 7th again and again and again.
إسرائيل دولة لا مقام لها على أرضنا. إحنا الدولة لابد أن نزيلها، لأنه بالفعل هي تعتبر كارثة أمنية وعسكرية وسياسية للأمة العربية والإسلامية، يجب أن تنتهي. لذلك احنا لا نخجل من نقول ذلك بكل قوة، إنه إسرائيل لازم نأدبها، وحنأدبها مرة ثانية وثالثة، ومش هذا حتكون طوفان الأقصى أول مرة، لا حتكون ثانية وثالثة ورابعة، لأنه احنا لدينا إصرار ولدينا قرار ولدينا إمكانيات أن نقاتل نعم. وأن نحارب. لكن كما قلت لك بدنا ندفع ثمن. نعم احنا مستعدين، معلش بدي أقول لك بشكل واضح، احنا اسمنا شعب الشهداء وبنفخر أنه وجود إسرائيل هو اللي بخلق كل هذه الآلام والعذابات والدموع والدماء. هي إسرائيل مش إحنا ضحية الاحتلال، نقطة وآخر السطر. لذلك ما حدا يلومنا، إحنا شو اللي بنعمله في 7 أكتوبر، في 10 أكتوبر، في مليون أكتوبر، إحنا اللي بنعمله مبرر. It is justified، مبرر.
I asked this earlier, but I'll ask it again now. To the anti-Israel people, what is Israel supposed to do about this? Let it happen? Allow Hamas to slaughter more innocent people and take more hostages? Of course not. Short history lesson here. If you're interested in me doing a longer full-length video about the history of this conflict, let me know. But Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, and Hamas immediately came in and destroyed all the infrastructure that Jews built. The greenhouses, buildings, all that stuff. They burned it down. They then won the Gaza elections democratically in 2006, and they've been in power ever since then. So when people tell you that Israel is occupying Gaza, they are lying to you. Yes, Israel has blockaded Gaza for pretty much that entire time, but guess what? So has Egypt. Where's the outcry about the Egyptian blockade? You're not going to find it, of course, because it doesn't exist. Ever since Hamas has been in power, there's been a ton of money that is poured into Gaza to build real civilian infrastructure, to turn Gaza into a prosperous society, to turn it into the Singapore of the Middle East because it's a gorgeous piece of land. But that has not happened. Hamas has stolen all of that money, and they've used it to enrich themselves and for terrorism. Why do you think that Hamas leaders have net worths of billions of dollars? They're stealing the money that's supposed to go towards humanitarian aid. It's very simple. Hamas hides in the terror tunnel network that they've built underneath Gaza, which is huge. Israeli defense officials say that the tunnels span 350 to 400 miles, which is 543 to 643 kilometers. That's insane. For reference, that is triple the size of Gaza itself. That's bigger than the London Underground, which is 403 kilometers in length, and is more than half the size of the New York City subway system. All that money wasted on terror infrastructure could have been put towards improving the lives of Gazans. But no, Hamas does not care about their civilians. All they care about is enriching themselves and destroying Israel. And so when Israeli strikes happen, Hamas hides underground like cowards, but they do not build bomb shelters above ground because, again, they don't care about their people. And actually, they want them to die because that makes Israel look bad. So to all the people who said that Israel is committing a genocide, congratulations, you've been played for fools by Hamas. You are doing their bidding for them. When Hamas refers to people as useful idiots, you are exactly who they're talking about. Great job. Hamas has done everything in its power to maximize civilian casualties because, again, it makes Israel look bad, and people fall for it, and they commit all sorts of war crimes to do this. They hide in refugee camps. That's not allowed. They try to blend in with the civilian population by not wearing military uniforms and then attack Israeli soldiers, resulting in civilian deaths. That's a war crime. They put weapons in schools and hospitals. More war crimes. They also hide in schools and hospitals. More war crimes. Their military headquarters was underneath a hospital. More war crimes. Hamas is evil. They don't care at all about their civilians. They murder people who do not support them and who speak out against them, and they make life in Gaza a living hell. I could go on and on. This video is already long enough though, and I think I've gotten my points across. The final topic I want to touch on kind of goes hand in hand. It's the rise of anti-Semitism and my problems with the Free Palestine movement. If you've paid even a little bit of attention since October 7th, you will have noticed a huge uptick in worldwide anti-Semitism. And there are honestly too many incidents to really name here. I don't have time to do that, but a few main ones come to mind. The synagogue in Australia getting burned down, the pogrom in Amsterdam, of course there are more, swastikas being spray painted, Jewish restaurants being damaged and terrorized, Jews getting harassed just for being Jews. I could go on and on. But all the stats will tell you that rates of anti-Semitism worldwide have significantly risen since October 7th. And because of this, anti-Semites who maybe have been hesitant in the past to express their views are a lot more open about it now. We see tons of anti-Semitism on Twitter, X, whatever, from big accounts like Myron Gaines, Jackson Hinkle, Dan Bilzerian, Jake Shields, Andrew Tate, Dr. Lupus. There are others, and even from someone like Candace Owens, who I used to like when I was younger, admittedly, but she's gone completely off the rails. Elon's Twitter is a breeding ground for anti-Semitism, and if you've spent a little bit of time on Twitter, you would know that. Another major breeding ground for anti-Semitism is on college campuses, especially here in the United States. I don't even have time to talk about the encampments, but they happen at a lot of different schools. But you have professors at prestigious universities that are pushing anti-Semitism. At Columbia, an Ivy League school, and a cesspool for Jew hatred. It's probably the most anti-Semitic school in the entire country. You have this guy teaching a class on Zionism. I'm sure that's going to go really well. You have this professor at the University of Pennsylvania, which is also an Ivy League school, liking a tweet that said playing the victim is what Jews are best at. That's pretty gross. This professor at Carnegie Mellon allegedly telling a Jewish student that she should learn what Jews do to make themselves such a hated group. You have this professor at MIT, which might as well be an Ivy League school, teaching students that Jews have no connection to Israel, which is an obvious lie, and that Israeli textbooks weaponize trauma of the Holocaust. That's vile. And you have this professor at Rutgers, which is not really that prestigious, but is a state-funded school in New Jersey, sharing anti-Semitic memes. And there are certainly more professors like this out there. I feel very lucky that we don't tolerate stuff like that at my university. I go to Clemson University in South Carolina, by the way, go Tigers, because even though I'm not Jewish, I wouldn't even feel safe on Columbia's campus as an open Zionist. Speaking of Zionism, there's been a ton of misconceptions on what Zionism is. Plain and simple, it's the belief that Jews have a right to self-determination in their historic homeland, which is the land of Israel. That's it. That's literally all it is. You don't even have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. I'm not Jewish and I'm a Zionist. There are tons of non-Jewish Zionists. So the belief that Zionism is a Jewish supremacy movement or is a racist movement or whatever pro-Palestinians try to say it is, it's just not true. It's completely unfounded. In terms of the Free Palestine movement, there are really two archetypes of people. Those who have no idea what they're talking about, they've been lied to, they don't know who they're supporting, and those who know exactly what they're doing. They don't like Jews, they're radical Muslims, whatever it may be. The majority of people fall into that first category, in my opinion, and here's a great video from Zach Sage showing this phenomenon perfectly.
You win $100. First question, have you guys chanted from the river to the sea?
Yes.
Okay, which river, which sea?
The Sea of...
So you don't know that? Okay. No. The answer was the Mediterranean and the Jordan. What does Hamas say their #1 goal is according to their charter?
They just wanted to free Palestine.
It's to murder all Jews around the world. How many years did Israel occupy Gaza?
Late 1800s, the entire time.
Since 48.
It was actually under Egyptian control for the first 20 or so years, and then Israel actually left Gaza in 2006.
I'm shocked. Wait, they left?
What is the definition of Zionism?
Doesn't that mean you hate Palestinians, right?
Jewish people who think that Judaism is the highest race.
Zionism actually just means that you think Jews are entitled to having their own homeland to protect themselves from another Holocaust. You don't even have to be Jewish. That makes you a Zionist.
Okay.
What does Intifada revolution mean?
I don't know what that means.
But you've chanted it?
Yeah.
It's like a global call to murder Jews.
Wow. Wow.
Did you know you said that?
No.
Would you say it again?
Probably not.
How much have our foreign adversaries donated to American universities in the last decade?
No idea.
I couldn't give you a number on that.
The answer was over $6 billion. How many Gazan refugees have the Arab neighboring countries let in the last few months?
35,000.
The answer was 0.
Look, you asked an education major about...
Students don't seem to know what they stand for. So wouldn't it be great if these expensive colleges actually taught them something?
Oh, that video is such a classic. Go follow Zach Sage on Twitter and Instagram if you're not already, but it really displays so well how ignorant these people are. And most of these people are total imbeciles. You have groups like Queers for Palestine. How can I forget about the infamous Queers for Palestine? It's hard to believe that a group like this actually is real. It's stunning how anyone can be this ignorant in today's day and age when you can do 2 minutes of research to find out what happens to gays in Palestine. As a gay man myself, it is baffling that people believe that a free Palestine would be a utopia for gays. It could not be further from the truth. Gay rights are not a thing in Gaza and in the areas of the West Bank controlled by the Palestinian Authority. And you have these same people chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which means no more Israel. So first, I'm going to play another video from Zach Sage. This one is insane. I'm not going to show the whole thing, but he actually went to Ramallah, which was extremely dangerous for him because he's actually Jewish, but he went there, which is in the West Bank, and he asked people different questions, and let's just hear it straight from them, what their thoughts are on Queers for Palestine.
In the U.S., it's a big movement right now, Queers for Palestine. Are you supportive of that?
No, we don't have it.
You don't have gay people here?
No.
No. No.
It's like an alien. It would not be accepted.
No, to be honest with you, no.
Don't believe them? Well, what about this video right here? Is this one going to change your mind?
شعبنا الفلسطيني المسلم لا يرضى أن يكون لوطي واحد يجاهر بفاحشته. هل ترضون أن يكون على أرض القدس وفلسطين لوطيا واحد؟ هل ترضون؟ ولا يرضى شعبنا أن توجد مؤسسات للفاحشة ومقدماتها على أرض فلسطين المباركة الطاهرة.
The idea that a free Palestine that replaces Israel would somehow be accepting of Jews, Christians, gays, trans people, it's absurd. It has no basis in reality. And guess what? There's already a state where Jews, Christians, Muslims, gays, etc. have equal rights. It's called Israel. And yes, gay marriage is not legal in Israel, but gays are not discriminated against because they're gay. That was outlawed, and gay couples are allowed to adopt kids. Plus, gay marriages performed elsewhere are recognized by Israel. And let's talk about the claim of apartheid, because this is another lie that pro-Palestinians peddle against Israel. This is 100% not true. First of all, most of the road signs in Israel are in 3 languages: Hebrew, Arabic, and English. Where's the apartheid there? Arab Muslim citizens have the same rights in Israel that Jewish citizens have. Most people who make this claim about apartheid have never been to Israel and have never talked to an Israeli Arab. The majority of Israeli Arabs will tell you that life is substantially better for them in Israel than in any other country in the Middle East. Israel is home to the only free Arabs in the Middle East. Israel is the only democracy in the entire region. There are Arab political parties in the Knesset. There are Arabs on the Israeli Supreme Court. There are Arab doctors and teachers and all that stuff. Israeli Arabs have the same opportunities and rights that Israeli Jews have. Here is one Israeli Arab telling her story.
Israel gave me everything. I'm the product of peace between Jews and Arabs, and how Jews and Arabs can live peacefully side by side together as brothers and sisters. My name is Sofia Salma Khalifa, and this is my story. I'm a Muslim Arab growing up in Israel. I'm a mother of 2, and I have a master's from Stanford University. I was born to a Muslim family in Israel. My mom is a single mom. I have 8 siblings. My dad has 2 wives in parallel, and my mom decided she didn't want to live with his wife in the same house and didn't want to be in that village. And she went and moved to Nahariya. This is the Jewish town in northern Israel where she raised us, 9 children, on her own. We were supported by the welfare in Israel, by the welfare system, because otherwise my mom would not be able to provide. Israel is a very beautiful and strong multi-ethnic democracy. Around 20% of the population are Arab Muslims, like myself. We also have Christian Arabs, we have Druze. The Arab citizens of Israel receive equal rights. They get welfare, they get education, they get health care, they get all the rights, the protection, anything that a Jewish citizen would get.
Another one of my problems with this movement is the holier-than-thou attitude that so many of its members have. They think that they know better than Israelis that have lived through the conflict their entire lives, while these people have never been to the Middle East. They've learned about the conflict from TikTok, and they think that makes them more qualified to talk about the conflict than people who live there. It's insane. They have no tolerance for different opinions, because once they hear different opinions, once they hear the truth, their entire worldview falls apart. For example, if they were to see that last video of that Israeli Arab that I just showed you, they would probably call that propaganda. So that's really who these people are. Even though I've done a lot of research on the history of the conflict, if you had the chance to ask me or an Israeli about the conflict, ask the person who actually lives there. I don't know shit compared to people who live through this every day. It's crazy to me that people do not understand this very easy concept. And let's talk about these idiot college students chanting to globalize the intifada. Let's hear it from Palestinians directly what intifada means.
What does antifada mean?
Violent.
Thank you, Mr. North Face, for keeping it very succinct. Yes, intifada basically means violence. So this is advocating for violence against Jews, and essentially it's calling for worldwide violence. And so when you see terrorist attacks like we saw in New Orleans, with the terrorist flying an ISIS flag on his truck, you should not be surprised, because this is what globalized the intifada looks like. That's just one example of many. The Christmas market attack in Germany, which I believe was done by a radical ex-Muslim. Ex-Muslims that knew him agree that he was actually not ex-Muslim. Get familiar with the concept of taqiyya. Here's what it means. Take a look. Get familiar with it. Once you know what radical Muslims do to spread Islam, you can never look back. And don't be surprised when more attacks like this happen. The last thing I want to briefly talk about is the propaganda and the fake videos that come out of Gaza. I probably will make a full-length video about this if you're interested, but the amount of propaganda that comes out of Gaza is insane. So you have pro-Palestinians on X, Twitter, claiming that something happened in Gaza when in reality it happened in like Syria or Yemen years ago. That happened all the time during this war. You then have videos like this that claim that it's so cold in Gaza that it's snowing, and then you take 2 seconds to look at the weather app and it's like 60 degrees outside, 15 Celsius. Yeah, it doesn't snow when it's that warm, like at all. You have another one like this where they tried to claim it was so cold they got frostbite in their toes, when in reality they took that picture straight off of Wikipedia. I could go on and on. And before I wrap up, I have to talk about Mr. Fafo. So Mr. Fafo is this iconic, famous actor in Gaza that's used in a ton of fake videos. And he's had a crazy life. I'll put this graphic on screen. It makes me laugh every time I see this because, I mean, this guy was killed. He was brought back to life. I actually can't keep track of how many times that he's died in this war. It's been a lot. But long story short, whenever you see this guy in a video from Gaza, odds are it's probably fake. There's more I could talk about, like why Israel has a right to exist, the truth about the Palestinian national identity and where it came from, the history of the conflict in general, why Jews are the native inhabitants of the land of Israel, the blatant lie that Jesus was Palestinian. That's my favorite one. It's so absurd. Go in depth into Pallywood and the fake videos that come out of Gaza, all that stuff. And maybe I will eventually. Let me know if you're interested in any of those topics. But I think this video is plenty long enough, and I've gotten my point across. Now, before I wrap things up, I know someone is bound to say, Cal, you're not Israeli, you're not Jewish, why do you care so much? And that's a valid question. Both of these things are true. I'm not Israeli and I'm not Jewish. There are a few reasons why I care. One of which is I'm interested in this kind of stuff, in global politics. I mean, that's literally what my major is, political science with a focus in global politics. I've always been naturally curious about the world, ever since I was a little boy. And let's be honest, the American public school system, how do I put this nicely? It's fucking horrible, especially where I'm from. My home state of Oregon has terrible public schools. At the time when I was going to public school there, it had the third worst public school system anywhere in the country, which is pretty impressive considering the South is not really known for great public schools. But because the public school system in Oregon sucked, I didn't really learn anything. So I had to teach myself almost everything that I know about the world. And so that's one thing. It's obviously not the only thing though, otherwise I would not be making this video. I care about the truth. It annoys me greatly when I see people fall for obvious propaganda and seeing people blatantly lie and get away with it. The lies from the pro-Palestine movement have always bothered me, even before October 7th, because if you do 5 minutes of research, the majority of what they claim is revealed to be total bullshit. I was always pro-Israel, but I wasn't public about it until pretty recently. If you look at my Twitter account, which you should go follow me, You'll see that I've had it since about 2019, but I didn't really tweet at all until March of 2024, and not regularly since around May of 2024. There's a reason for that. I was always a little bit hesitant to share my opinions on the internet. It's kind of scary if you think about it. But then October 7th happened. I watched what happened on that day, and I was absolutely horrified, as any person with a functioning brain and moral compass would be. I saw the worst of what humanity has to offer on that horrific day. And that day opened my eyes permanently. It changed me. I don't think I've ever been the same after watching some of that footage. I can never go back now. How could I? And after that, I expected the international community, the world, to stand with Israel and to support them. Unfortunately, that is not at all what has happened. Couldn't be further from it. In the days after the terrorist attack, you had people calling Hamas the terrorists who slaughtered innocent people enjoying themselves at a music festival, the terrorists who killed children in their homes, burned people alive, raped women, shot women in the face, shot RPGs into moving civilian vehicles, and took children hostage, including a 9-month-old baby and his 4-year-old brother, freedom fighters. I saw the shocking rise of anti-Semitism. I was always taught how important the phrase never again is. And I saw the truth, that never again is now. So eventually, I couldn't be silent anymore. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't speak out against this and at least try to make a difference. I was a little bit scared to speak up, but I knew that I had to. It was the right thing to do. And I'm so glad that I did speak up, because I've met some amazing people because I did. Israeli, Jewish, non-Jews like me who feel the same way that I do. And now I have skin in the game. I've become friends with Israelis that I really care about, that are living through the consequences of this war every day. I want them to be able to live in peace without fear of being killed by terrorists, without having to be woken up in the middle of the night because of missiles. I don't want them to be bullied, harassed, hated for who they are, because they're Israeli, because they're Jewish, because of things they can't control. I want them to be able to live happy, prosperous, normal lives. I want to be able to go visit one day. I want everyone to be able to live in peace, and that includes Palestinians. I care about standing up for the truth, for supporting good against the forces of evil, for supporting the people that accept me for who I am versus people that would kill me for it. But most of all, it's about standing up for what's right. And I'm certainly going to continue to do that.